Awesome skupaj. Welcome everyone joining us on the live stream. My name is Rokranz and I'll be the host for today for this first installment of a new series of online talks convened by Mladi za podnebno pravičnost, or Youth for Climate Justice Slovenia. At this first moment, I'd like to maybe recall something that Naomi Klein said recently, or a quote from Milton Friedman, which said, only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. And certainly one of the exciting ideas laying around is degrowth. And today I'm happy to be joined by two colleagues with whom we can discuss this topic in both the light of the virus, however we conceptualize it as a hyperobject, or which is an interesting entry point in itself. But however, we are joined by Vincent Liegey. He is the co-author of several books on degrowth and is a visible spokesperson of the international degrowth movement. He's an engineer by background, an interdisciplinary researcher, and a coordinator of a degrowth-inspired social cooperative in Cargonomia in Budapest. And we are also joined by Gal Krizmanic. He works at Radio Student as a journalist, and he's done a lot of work in economy and politics, also together with Matej Cviter on their radio show Ponudba in Preopraševanje, which is a kind of play on words, like supply, and it's close to supply and demand, right? But it means supply and questioning. So they also done some recent shows on degrowth together with Aida Pistotnik, who couldn't join us today, but she did have a nice talk just 2 days ago with another initiative here in Slovenia, Pritličja, in their talk series Karantena, and they discussed also degrowth and debt. And in the stream, they also mentioned that they would like to discuss degrowth more, and we were just setting up this talk, so we thought there's very nice synergies going on there. But in any case, we hoped to dedicate the session to a broader general audience to kind of use this situation we're now currently both in what's happening in the sphere of real politics to the pandemic situation, and think through degrowth through these premises. So in a kind of exercise of collective sense making, envisioning, and strategy building, we can kind of create the tools to unmake capitalism and create the conditions to co-create just futures. So I don't want to be too long with this introduction, but maybe just a little bit of intro into then Vincent's presentation, which will be for about half an hour, followed by a discussion and taking some live questions. Is, well, some people, disproportionate numbers of people are like us here at home, and being able to work remotely or however, and hold these talks. Some segments of these, if they follow their social media feeds, might get a certain impression that, hey, aren't we kind of living degrowth already? It's a naive premise, one could say, but still, while we hear talks of degrowth more, I believe these days in Slovenia, it's not necessarily that the meaning is kind of going with that, or like really generative discussions. It seems we have introduction after introduction events for degrowth, but it is how it is. And I'm sure we can come up with creative forms to kind of build on that. But anyway, if we follow our Facebook feeds, we see things like swaths of animals are returning back to the city, and oh, this is a time to relax, reflect, have family time, And you know, we can do work remotely. Isn't that like a key point of degrowth? Well, one of the key kind of policies or transition policies. There's less cars if you happen to be walking your dog, or are allowed to walk your dog on the streets. And look, like factories in China are closing, and we see these graphs, right, of less pollution and stuff. So living in our social media bubbles, one could almost think like, hey, this thing is a good thing, right? And but also on the other side, there's a whole heap of other factors which are in some sense closing some futures, but at the same time opening some exciting but also kind of terrifying different ones. So maybe at this stage I would hand it over to Vincent.
So thanks a lot, Rock, for your invitation and the organization of this discussion. I have half an hour, which is already very challenging to present degrowth in half an hour. So you can imagine it's even more challenging to present end degrowth and this particular historic situation that we are facing with coronavirus. So I would like to focus more on what's happening now, but you will get a lot of clue about what do we mean by degrowth when I will reflect on the actual situation. And I will suggest a presentation in three parts. The first part will be, and I think it's really, really important to insist on that, what we are experiencing now is not degrowth. It's definitely not the degrowth that we've been promoting, what we've been speaking about in the last year. My second point will be that, but maybe it could be an opportunity for degrowth, and I will explain why. And the third point will be more, and then I will focus more on what is degrowth and why do we suggest. It will be more what degrowth can address to the particular situation that we are experiencing now, and also how to be ready for the next steps after coronavirus is disappearing, what to do and how to achieve it. And I will conclude directly reflecting on what you said in your introduction on Naomi Klein and also on the shock doctrine. Are we facing again a shock doctrine, or on the contrary, there is hope for something else, what I will develop a bit, and I will call the pedagogy of the catastrophe. So the first part of my presentation is really, and I really want to be clear, and I don't want any doubts about that, because we've been attacked, we've been on social medias and some medias, we've been attacked that, these degrowth idiotic people dreamed about it, now we face it. And it's exactly the contrary. What we are facing now, it's exactly the contrary to what degrowth would like to implement. It's something which is heteronomous. It's not something which is democratic. We have to impose to the people something incredibly violent, which is this, and it's necessary. And it's necessary because of political decisions which have been taken in the last years or decades, and also political decisions which haven't been taken in the months prior or in the months in the beginning of this crisis. So it's imposed. It's not democratic. It's violent. It's blind. To be confined at home can be funny for some of us, can be nice for a few days, a few weeks, but I'm afraid that it's something which is incredibly violent for human beings. And one of the key points of degrowth is always to put back in the center of our political agenda, political thinking, understanding of a society, what is, I think, one of the most important things for human beings, that human interaction. And now we are condemned to have human interaction with what we are doing right now, only with devices, only through online technologies and so on. So it's a type of dystopic period what we have to deal with. Also, and it's something what degrowth is always underlining, that the first of degrowth should be degrowth in inequalities. And this problem started from a world where there were incredible rising inequalities. We reached maybe a historic level in inequalities with that neoliberalism and so on. And unfortunately, this imposed confinement, which is unfortunately necessary due to lack of anticipation and due to a type of economic system which somehow destroyed our social services, the health system, and so on and so on. So it's even more increasing the inequalities, because if you are confined at home in a block of flat in the suburbs of a large cities with a lot of people in the same flat, it's not the same type of confinement than if you have the luxury to have a secondary house next to the sea and you can enjoy gardening, you can enjoy going out and so on. If you have a type of job where you pushed to go to work and expose yourself and take risk, it's not the same type of confinement if you are more privileged and home office. Also, if you have to work, you cannot care about your children. So in this particular time where education has to be done from home, inequalities will be raised like a tragedy. So inequalities were very strong and they are even bigger. So what we are experiencing now, this slowing down with imposed confinement, with story is really, really not degrowth because it's not chosen, it's not planned, it's not democratically discussed. And moreover, we don't have any transparency on the type of decision which are taken. Let's speak a bit about the situation in France, where it seems that in the beginning, Macron's administration decided to, without informing the people, to go to a general immunity, to let the virus be spread around. And we have to impose now a very totalitarian confinement because we took the bad decision without political debate in the beginning. And this blind, violent, imposed confinement has terrible consequences on the people. I also would like here to underline what that this confinement also has a terrible impact on what is one of the fundamental pillars of degrowth. I would call it ecofeminism, because a lot of women are facing again a type of very violent situation. In France, we speak about an increase of 30%. I'm afraid it's even worse, of violence against the women, but also violence against the children, and so on and so on. So it's something which is not desirable, it's something which is not decided, it's something which is not democratic, but it's a consequence of everything what degrowth was alerting our society for almost 2 decades. This virus is more revealing a lot of problem in our society than the problem on its own. It's more like a symptom more than the problem on its own. First, and there are still debate about that, so I open the question, but we know that with more biodiversity, such viruses are a lower chance to develop in that way and to be spread around, as we experience. The same in a less globalized world, in a world when you have less crazy airplanes traveling all around the world, transporting everything everywhere, such a virus wouldn't have traveled so quickly as it did before. Also, now what we face, it's not only a problem with the virus, it's not only alerting us about our health system, which we're not prepared for something which is, to be honest, it's a simple virus. To be honest, it's not such a tragedy when you look at the figures and number of deaths, who is dying. It's not a type of virus who is killing 50% of the children, for example. I mean, imagine if we get a virus which was worse. But already with a simple virus, all our health system is collapsing. And also, we can understand and we can see something what degrowth was also alerting, that our economic system, our food chain, our production supply chains and so on are not resilient. And we face type of ridiculous situation, like for example, some farms cannot produce any more food because there is a breakdown in the logistics system, for example, and it's something which is which was hidden by the former system. For example, in France, you have a lot of vegetable or fruits which are ready to be harvested, and they cannot because it turned out that, and we knew about it and we were learning about that, it turned out that this type of intensive agriculture was exploiting people coming from Eastern Europe, and they are blocked in their countries because we close the border, so we will starve to death. There are other stories where farms have to stop because one of the tractor has a broken piece, but we don't produce and we don't know how to repair this piece anymore in France or in none of the country, and the piece is maybe blocked in another country on the other side of the border. So we had something which was really powerful, very strong, till everything is working very well, till you still have a lot of energy in the system, till you still have a lot of exploitation of the people and the nature and the system, but which is incredibly fragile as soon as there is a small problem. And now we are facing this very frightening situation, and that's why it's not degrowth, that we could see more and more problems in the upcoming weeks because of this system which was not resilient, which is broken down with only a simple virus. And maybe we will start to face problem to supply the food to the people. We will face problem with energy, with water, and this type of things. So it's not at all degrowth from all these type of things. It's exactly what degrowth was warning about, that we constructed a super powerful system, which was an illusion of a mega machine which was perfectly working, an illusion of a system which gave the freedom, or a myth of freedom to consume whatever we want, whenever we want, and so on. And this simple virus is showing to us that it was a big lie, and we have a system which is non-resilient. So that's my first point. This situation is not at all degrowth. Second point, but maybe it could be an opportunity, and it opens some interesting pathways. The first one, again, a few weeks ago, when I was giving a talk on degrowth, one of the main arguments, whoever the profile of the persons against degrowth, was not that I disagree with degrowth. I mean, there was more and more a consensus, larger support for degrowth ideas and so on. But the main argument against degrowth that it's not possible to stop the economy. A simple virus gave us a demonstration that it is possible, with the fear to have some dead people in our society, and we have to do it. We should have done it differently, but we have to do it right now. We stop the economy from one day to the other one. Where till a few weeks ago, the main narrative that you cannot stop car production, you cannot stop advertisement, you cannot stop big cargo boats transporting everything on containers and so on and so on. No, we got the evidence that if we want, we can. So the message, and it opens, it's a great opportunity for degrowth. The message, what we have, is that we should get rid of these beliefs that it's easier to think about the collapse of our civilization rather than going out of capitalism. We can see that if we want, we can. It's a political debate. It should be based on democratic discussion and decisions, but we can reappropriate or re-embed, to quote Karl Polanyi jargon, the economy, and to stop it for something which is not desirable, and to produce things that we don't need anymore, and to focus on what's the most important. So it provides a very interesting opportunity for degrowth. The second point, which is an opportunity, and it was in most of our texts with my co-writers in the last 2 or 3 years, that there was an emergency to slow down. What was one of the main challenges to our civilization till a few weeks ago was that if you talk to an entrepreneur, if you talk to a politician, if you talk to a decision maker, if you talk to a researcher, if you talk to whoever, even activists and so on, everybody was like a hamster in the wheel, running quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. Everybody had to produce more, had to fill more report, have to run for budget for the research and so on and so on. And we never had time to slow down, to think, to debate, to reflect, and to understand what are our real challenges and how to move on to provide solution and so on. And now we're forced to do it. So you have a large part of the world which is now sitting in front of their computer like we do, and we have the opportunity to do what we couldn't do till a few weeks ago: to read, to think, to reflect, to watch movies, to debate with the family, or just to slow down, to cook at home, to care about the children and so on. So it's a tragedy, but from these tragedies there are interesting parts on which we can build something. The third and last point, which is providing an opportunity for degrowth, we understood, as I said first, that we can stop the economy, but we also realize that the economy stopped. We don't produce as much as we did a few weeks ago, and life is still going on. And we realize that life can be beautiful without producing thousands of tons of useless things every day, and without consuming thousands of tons of useless things every day, without producing thousands of pages of reports nobody read every day. We can slow down, we can reappropriate free time, and life is still beautiful. And parallelly to that, it's an opportunity to reflect on what's the most important for well-being. what is not necessary, and what's the most important. So one of the main issues of all of us in these days is to get food every day. It's to get the toilet paper, to be sure that we are safe at home, to deal with care, how to share the task at home with the wife, with the husband, with the children, and so on. We realize how difficult and important is education. When you start to get back your children 24 hours and 24 hours with you at home, you realize that, yeah, the teachers, the type of job they were doing is a tough job. We realize how important is our health system, where till a few weeks ago, it was only austerity plans, it was only neoliberal political agenda to only destroy this type of public services and so on. So it's an invitation to do what is one of the key questions of the degrowth political agenda or degrowth project, what we develop in our book, Degrowth Project, to reappropriate individually, collectively, politically, the key question: what are our fundamental basic needs and how to fulfill them in a democratic, sustainable, fair, transparent, and I would even add desirable way, and to question what do we produce, how, for what kind of use. And now we really have this great opportunity to finally do that, which was impossible in this mega machine, in this world which was always running and running and running till a few weeks ago. So on that, we can build what is one of the key point of degrowth, what we call a decolonization of our imaginary. So to make a step aside and to start to look at the world with another perspective and to start to really reappropriate meaningful life, meaningful activities, meaningful productions, meaningful consumptions, and also to think about it in a much more solidarity way, to think about it in sharing, in caring, and so on. So we have this great opportunity. I think I'm good with the time and arrive to the third and last part of my presentation, which will focus more on the degrowth project. So before presenting a few proposals, what degrowth could address to the crisis right now, and later what to implement, let me say a few words of what is degrowth. So degrowth is a provocative slogan, which is inviting us, and it was invented like that almost 20 years ago in France, which is inviting us to question whether economic growth in a finite world, is it possible forever? Even if it was possible, we should question whether it makes sense. Was the world of yesterday something really desirable, to always run further, quicker, to produce more, what we don't really need, to consume more, to work more, etc., etc. It was also an invitation to question what do we measure with growth. So we see again when we listen to mainstream politicians or medias or economists, how the religion of growth is still there. I mean, Christine Lagarde is only speaking about growth. So now she speaks about green growth, but what we need again is growth, growth, growth. And the degrowth was an invitation to question what is behind growth, what is GDP, what do we measure? Is it really something which is fundamental for our well-being? And how to move from only a quantitative understanding of our life with this lie that more would necessarily mean better, and to move to something much more quantitative. What are meaningful life? And degrowth is this provocative slogan for it, which is an invitation for that. The second point of degrowth is a multidimensional thinking, set of thoughts, or even matrix of thoughts. And we try to bring together a lot of challenges which are now revealed by the coronavirus, our dependency on a very complex and energetic system with a lot of oil, a lot of raw material, what we have to import from all around the world. It's about climate change. One of the good points of which provides also an opportunity, and I forgot to say it, of this time, we realize something which been in the degrowth debate in the beginning, that if you slow down the economy, that's the only way to reduce our environmental impact. So now we have all the fights about that. The only time in the last decades where we could reduce our environmental impact, it was not when we invested a lot of money on so-called green energies or green transition or green growth or green capitalism and so on, which never been working. That's what we call the myth of decoupling. There's never been any decoupling between economic growth and environmental impact. But on the contrary, When you have a crisis like in 2008, or when you confine half of the world, like what we do now, and you slow down the economy, our environmental impact is really slowing down. So degrowth is an invitation to understand that and how to reduce our economies in a smart way, not to break down solidarity, democracy, and so on, but on the contrary, to focus back on what's the most important. And parallelly to that, it's an invitation to reevaluate meaningful jobs, to reevaluate all the domination we have in our society, to deal with what Ivan Illich was calling tools for conviviality, or how to implement the type of infrastructure, the type of institutions, type of tools which are fulfilling our basic needs without going above the counterproductive threshold. It's also an invitation, to quote Karl Polanyi, to re-embed the economy. So to put back the economy in its right place, that the economy shouldn't be something driving our politics, but the economy should be something in the service of politics. And I could add a lot of other examples, like the question of autonomy, how to rethink the society based on direct democracy, based on much more subsidiarity, how to take the decision with the people who are facing the consequences of the decision in a much more direct way. And degrowth was addressing all these problems, which are still under challenge. They were challenged before the beginning of coronavirus, but now they are attacked from everywhere. We can see how there is a rise of totalitarianism, and there is a very frightening dynamics all around Europe with that. State of emergencies have been put almost in most of the European countries. Unfortunately, and of course, and it's maybe back to the shock doctrine, it's not only used to save life, but it's used also to drive, to follow a political agenda, which is much more neoliberal political agenda. We can observe that in a lot of European countries. Totalitarianism is also driving us to a type of technological dictatorship dystopia. When I look at what's happening in France, where you have drones, helicopters, they plan to implement type of IT tools to check the movement of the people and to start to control all the population and with this type of devices and so on. So this is exactly the contrary to what degrowth was questioning and so on. So what to do right now? So first, exactly the contrary to what most of the governments in Europe are doing. So no totalitarianism, but democracy, no centralization of power, but much more self-organization and relocalization of our production and the way we address the problem we deal with, and also with strong solidarity and planification to provide what's the most important in this time: mask, all the health tools, what you need in hospital to care about the people who are get infected and develop this terrible disease. Also to have as much as possible tests to start to understand much better how the disease is working, and to go out of this type of violent, imposed, blind confinement, but step by step, how to rethink a type of convivial, participatory, responsible confinement. And maybe we can come back on that in the discussion. We shouldn't protect the oligarchy and capitalist system, so we shouldn't put on the table money to save the companies, but do exactly the contrary: save the life of the people, and it will save the life of the companies. So we should implement on the EU level, or even on world level, if it's possible, unconditional basic income to provide security, economic security in this particular time to everybody. And with a dominoes effect, it will protect the companies, because the companies whose activity had to stop, and maybe some of them it's good that they had to stop. I speak about advertisement, airplane production, car production, a lot of things like that, which unfortunately some of them are still going on. But these companies can be protected because they don't have to pay anymore the salaries. So don't give the money to the companies, but give it to the people, and the companies can wait for the end of the crisis to reorganize themselves. For the one who still have to work, I think about the people caring about the food, caring about the logistic behind the food, caring about health, caring about solidarity with other people, caring about all the water system, the energy system, and so on. So these people will also get this unconditional basic income. And the companies caring about that don't have to care anymore about money, don't have to care about bureaucracy and economy, but they can only focus on doing the job as good as possible, and to also focus on how to do it in minimizing the risk of contaminating the people doing that job and so on. This unconditional basic income should be implemented with maximum income and reappropriation of everything which in this economic crisis is now collapsing. So I think more than ever, we should get back the democratic control on finance, on the bank sector, which was about to get a big economic crack before coronavirus. Unfortunately, they are hiding themselves from their responsibility because of coronavirus, but the crisis was already in the air months ago, and coronavirus was again just something accelerating, something which was underway. So how to re-embed the economy, and how to re-nationalize, or how to implement another way, another type of governance of the commons, how to reappropriate or to question property rights, where property right is in this particular time going against the common interest. For example, in most of the large cities nowadays, we have more than ever a lot of empty places because of mass tourism, which totally collapsed. So how to reappropriate all these places for a meaningful deconfinement, for a smart deconfinement, and so on. So that's only a few ideas of what we can implement right now. It can be also with gratuity or the free access for a lot of basic goods, which are very important, like water, like energy, like all the services to health system. And also, if you get somebody who's dead in your family, it's for free to get the services to have a good funerals and this type of things. So to put back things out of the economic logic in this time. The last point, what to do after. So I think it's really the Degrowth Project, based on this unconditional basic income which is implemented, and the democratic reappropriation of the economy, and all this decolonization of imaginary dynamics, rethinking what's the most important for well-being and so on. It's to go even further, to implement open relocalization, so to relocalize, and we should already start in this time of confinement as much as we can without exposing the people, our economies, to relocalize our production, to create a system which would be much smaller scale, deglobalized, but much more resilient. Because the pandemic, what we are facing now, I think it's just a one small shock we face compared to what is about to happen. First, we can get even more pandemics. The pandemic is followed by a strong economic crisis. And later we could get, maybe this summer, we will get historic droughts. Remember a few weeks ago what's happened in Australia. We already forgotten about that, and the huge fires and so on. So we have to think about a society around the unconditional autonomy allowance, which would be like an unconditional basic income, but partially demonetized. We should question how to provide to everybody from birth to death what is necessary to have a decent life, and to do it in a way which would be democratic, which would be sustainable, which would be desirable, which would be self-organized, which would be based on the territories and based on the logic on how to be much more resilient, without doing this absurdity of closing the border, but on the contrary, reopen the border but produce local. You need to produce local to be resilient and to reach frugal abundance, but open the border because more than ever we need solidarity with each other. So I arrived to my conclusion, and I am very good with my my timing, and which was offered to me, and thank you for that. So I think what we face now, it's really the dichotomy or the choice between the shock doctrine, which, and I really invite you to read the book again, or to watch a documentary made by Naomi Klein about that, which shows how shocks in the last decades were systematically used to go even further following a neoliberal political agenda. And it was going in this direction because they were well prepared. It's not something which was made by accident. They prepared for that. They had strong organization, lobbies, they implemented a strong narrative, a type of colonization of our imaginary to when the opportunity is here, to go ahead. And no, I think the situation is a bit different than in 2008, than in the former big shock or crisis we faced in the last decade after 9/11, for example, because we've been tricked enough time to understand that. Also, there were a lot of converging surveys and studies in the last months before the beginning of this coronavirus, showing that there is a rising interest in our society for what we call degrowth. People want to slow down. People want to reappropriate meaningful activities. People want to go out of this consumerism. People are pissed off with this aggression of advertisement everywhere. People understand that we face very frightening challenges towards the environment and so on. Also, it's even stronger among the younger communities. So the cultural hegemony is not anymore as much on the side of neoliberalism, but it's maybe more in this particular historic period on the side of a degrowth political agenda. So we have a much bigger chance to minimize or to fight against and the shock doctrine and the neoliberal political agenda, and to go more in what we call the pedagogy of the catastrophe. So the catastrophe that we face could be a pedagogy to go further. So as I said, as an opportunity, we saw that we can reappropriate the economy. We can slow it down and to orient it to something which would be much more meaningful for meaningful life, meaningful activities, and so on. And I would say that the challenge for degrowth and a lot of friends and a lot of other movement we've been working with for 2 decades to implement a plan B, to implement transition toward new models of society, which will be relocalized but based on solidarity, relocalized but open, which will be based on conviviality, autonomy, and I would say we have to rethink a world which will be based not on profit and always more and so on, but a world based on enjoyment of life. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Vincent, for that overview. Well, I do have some follow-up questions, but maybe at this point I would give Gal an opportunity to respond.
So maybe I would first give some observations that I think are relevant at this point. So I think that degrowthers sort of think a lot about few issues that are now have gained a lot of have become much more prominent and more pressing. First, it what Vincent already discussed at some length, that is politicization of economic questions. So for the last few decades, we had this system that actively tried to take economic issues out of politics. And I think we have here a situation that clearly shows that this is unsustainable or not possible. And I think one important point is also that even the system itself doesn't really believe it. So if you think about, if we talk about neoliberal economic theory, I think that with this crisis we have seen quite clearly that even the decision makers themselves are not really committed to it, or that it does not explain all behaviors of the state. For example, you have now enormous interventions by central banks that are taught that basically nationalized whole sorts of private economy that basically failed in this crisis. So we can talk about how neoliberalism failed or didn't respond to this crisis, but also we should think about that it does not explain acts of governments or basically a situation as it is. Secondly, maybe this is something that is also quite prominent now, but we haven't really touched yet, and that's the instrument of debt. So a credit. We have now a lot of discussions about debt in Europe that is focused, I think that was quite interesting, very much on power relations that come with debt. So we have now a lot of discussions about how basically countries that are less have less difficulties because of the coronavirus will try to help those who are most impacted. And questions here is not so much what are precise amounts of debt, but basically what are strings attached to this, what are conditions, how are conditioned, and what is legitimate and illegitimate debt. So I think maybe the interesting question would be now that this is, I think, something that Degrowth has introduced or talked a lot about legitimate and illegitimate debt, and how are these power structures that are supported by these relations.
Yeah, thanks a lot for this question, and I think it's really one of the key points of what's happening now, to how to repoliticize the economy, how to re-embed the economy. And I think one of the books I would advise people to read in this particular slowing down time of confinement would be The Great Transformation by Karl Polanyi, who already addressed all this problem in 1944. He wrote this book in another time of tragedy of Europe, which was the Second World War, making the same type of analysis what we can read nowadays in the framework of coronavirus, showing that depoliticized so-called apolitical economic system, which is this ultraliberalism what we had in our system, is driving to the type of shock, is driving to the type of tragedies what we face right now. And I think, and it was already something what Degrowth has been working on after the 2000 so-called crisis, and I think also about the fantastic work made by the Committee for the Cancellation of the Third World Debt, which is an organization from Liège in Belgium. We should go back to all this work, what we've been driving with a lot of organization about the imposture of the debt, the imposture of the crisis of 2008, and the way it was managed. Not to do the same mistake. We faced this logic that the profits are private and the loss are public. And again, it's a type of political agenda, what they tried to push for. Like, for example, I read an article in the Washington Post yesterday where the United States airline companies are asking the state to help them with $50 billion to survive. And based on the investigation made by the Washington Post, this $50 billion, it's exactly the amount of money which were given to the shareholders in the last years by these companies. So, which means that to give money to these companies right now would like to directly give public money to the shareholders. So I think it's time to go back to understand that what is debt, how is it created, by who, for what kind of purposes, what is a central bank, who is deciding how a central bank is working, and so on, to understand also that it's a bit demagogic or provocative, but we can create money, but we cannot create energy. We can create money, but money doesn't feed you. Money is not enough to provide masks to hospital and so on. Money is a social contract. And the question is how to reappropriate a social contract to make money again, to go out of this fetishization of money, to make money again as a tool to facilitate the solidarity, the interaction between the people, etc. I'm afraid that's not at all the direction what we take. The system tries to save its skin desperately, where you say that they understand. I mean, there is a type of cynicism. I think they realize how the system drove us to this tragedy. Again, I think it's not coronavirus the problem. The problem was the way our economies were organized, which makes our system not resilient at all. We could have addressed this coronavirus in a totally different ways, in a much less violent way than what we experienced and so on. So I think they start to realize that all this logic of just in time, all this logic of delocalizing all the production driven by only the logic of profit to China, like 80% of the active principles of the medicine what we consume in Europe are produced in China. So they start to realize that we went so far that we are now in a very unresilient, uncomfortable situation. But what they propose, if you listen to them, is just to save the system. I didn't see anybody going to Christine Lagarde and say, please give me 100 of billions of euros and I will transform my car industry into bike industry. Please give me hundred of billions of euros and I will relocalize the production of the medicine what we delocalize to China. I will do it now and I will do only generic and I will do it in a way that it has a direct access to the people and so on. I see also big declaration from the governments, but I don't see what Roosevelt did during the Second World War. Macron says that we are in war. Orban says that we are in war. So it's totally absurd to say that we are in war against a virus. You cannot be in war against a virus. A virus is a part of nature, but we are also part of nature. We have to live with the virus. We cannot be in war with the virus. So they say we are in war, but they don't apply anything what they should do. When Roosevelt wanted the United States to go into the war in 1942, he implemented, driven by the state, strong planification, strong reconversion of the industry, strong nationalization, strong messages asking the people to be responsible, to go into this effort of war. Now you have large declaration, totalitarianism, and desperate, freshly printed money put on the table to try to hope a system which was already dead before. And moreover, all the money which is put in the system, and that's what they don't understand compared to 2008 crisis, that it's not only a financial crisis. We have a financial crisis, but it's a real economic crisis because the real economy is stopped. So even if they put money in the things, this money will be burnt as soon as it is printed, will be distributed to oligarchs and do what, I don't know what. And even if we manage to step by step make the economy back on track, we will be got back by the reality. First, coronavirus, we are engaged in a story which is not only for 2 weeks of confinement, what the French government said in the beginning. I think it's a month or maybe years long-term story. So the economy won't be back on track as it was a few weeks ago in a few weeks or in a few months. So to put back money on this system, it's totally absurd because you create new bubbles, you create new debts which will never be reimbursed, like the one which were created after 2000 by Greenspan and the Enron Anderson economic scandal, which created 2008 crisis, where we created even more economic bubble, which are now exploding and so on. So we should stop this fake money put in the system to just for an oligarchy and so on. And even if we manage to go out of coronavirus, like we find tomorrow the vaccine and so on, we will get back by the other problem. We were about to reach the peak of conventional, non-conventional oil. So if we relaunch the economy, there will be stress again on the supply of cheap oil. There will also be more and more tension on a lot of raw material, which started to be problematic on the system. And we shouldn't forget about two other things: the environmental limits to growth, so biodiversity loss, climate change. We already forgotten about, I just said before, about the big fires in Australia. It was all the world was frightened by the big fires in Australia in January. Now we have this coronavirus and we forgot what was a shock just before. So we have to address this problem. And also we shouldn't forget that before coronavirus, there were a lot of rising movements all around the world for much more equality. We are living in a world of inequality, which are unbearable. And we have, following that, we have strong political problems. We have strong tensions in our democracies and so on. And now the actual governments can only save their skin with the fear of coronavirus, implementing even more totalitarianism. So that's why we have to keep in mind. And I think the debate, and I invite everybody to read the work of the Committee of the Cancellation of the Third World Debt, the debate on how money is created, for what kind of purposes, the imposture of public and private debt, and to make audit about that, and to refuse to pay back the unlegitimate part of this debt and so on, and not to create even more debt, is a central issue, which is driving to how to reappropriate economy, how to reappropriate finance, the bank system, and to use it as a tool for transition and not the contrary. And my last point about that, I think we shouldn't forget, and it's also a work coming from the CIDTM, this committee, about that we have the economic debt, but we have something which is even worse, which is a hidden part of the debt, which is the environmental debt. We could develop our economies in Western Europe, in the Western world, because we were stealing for decades a lot of resources from another part of the world. And we have a responsibility toward this other part of the world. And the transition out of this growth system should be in cooperation with the so-called third world countries, should be in cooperation with what I would call the under-westernized countries, from which we have a lot to learn. I think about indigenous people, we have a lot to teach to us about biodiversity and this type of things.
Excellent. Thanks, Vincent. Just a time check. I think we have about 10 to 15 minutes left. We can also go over a few minutes. I'd only have maybe one follow-up question, and then we have 2 questions from the stream that I think we could pose and discuss. So going back to when you mentioned basic income as one potential, way forward. Of course, we're talking about different shades of basic income, and even today, where there's Spain, for example, or even in Slovenia, the government is rolling out something that it's calling basic income, but is questionable whether it's really getting to those people who really need it, or disproportionately, or in some kind of bureaucratic loops, however, like the administrative, bureaucratic discourse. But so I think what you were saying is something, well, maybe basic income in fiat money, etc., is a kind of a transition strategy. But I think in like medium and longer term, you have in mind the model of dotación inconditionnelle autonomie, which you wrote about previously as well. And it's a kind of return not to, having cash handouts, but a return to the commons and co-producing the commons, the medical commons, the food commons, the toilet paper commons. So maybe you could, it's also gaining a little bit of traction, you could say, in Slovenia and obviously internationally as well. We have a couple of people who are working on this quite intensely, but it's not really hitting the kind of policy arena or the mainstream. So maybe just a word or two about the kind of both the model and kind of a transition strategy attached to the model.
Yeah, so first I'd like to make a comment, and I will try to be very, very short to give space for people who let questions online. First, we have to be very careful with the type of unconditional basic income which could be proposed by some governments. So to be honest, I didn't have time to really follow and to really check in details what's happening in Spain, but it's more an invitation that there are unconditional basic income and unconditional basic income. So an economic tool is far away from being enough, for being meaningful. With a tool, you can do a lot of contradictory things. That's why unconditional basic income was also in the political agenda of Milton Friedman, and it's also in the political agenda of degrowth. But the degrowth unconditional basic income would be going with a lot of other type of measures. The first one I already said, it's implementation of a maximum income. I think in this time, and I was quoted Roosevelt and Macron and Orban saying that we are in war. In the Second World War, Roosevelt implemented such a maximum income, saying that to face the effort of war, we need to have solidarity. We cannot accept anymore to have people getting huge amount of money where the economy is collapsing and where we need to focus the effort in solidarity in the health system and so on. So we need an unconditional basic income, which would be with a maximum income. The second point, when I listen to the news, either in Hungary or in France particularly, because I'm from France and I live in Hungary, but I think you find the same type of contradiction everywhere. So one day, somebody wakes up and says, but we have a problem here because it turns out that the students don't get any more the scholarships, they cannot pay for their rent, so we should implement a type of solidarity measure for the students. The day after, it will be the car industry. The day after, it will be the dockers. The day after, it will be I don't know who. And you see that each time it's a lot of work. You forget some people. You implement something very bureaucratic, very difficult. Money never arrives to the right person who needs your money and so on. What is very fantastic and interesting with unconditional basic income, that it's technically very easy to implement. I mean, in one day, it could be implemented on EU level. We all have a healthcare number. Based on that number, we send a bank account and money is directly transferred to everybody every month, and the problem is solved. Moreover, it's very interesting because in this particular time, this money can only be used for important resources. So somehow it would already be a step toward unconditional autonomy allowance. So all around Europe, most of useless shops are closed except for Amazon, which is another problem. We should shut down Amazon and this type of companies, which means that money will be used to buy food. So to protect food producers and this type of things. Money will be used to buy the things which are really necessary for survival, and somehow will reinforce the chain supply for these necessary things. And the next step is really to start to think what should be for free. So unconditional autonomy allowance, what we develop in our book with my co-writers, is to provide from birth to death what is necessary to have a decent life. It can be given in cash. It can be given in a local currency. So some territories already started to develop local currency. I think after coronavirus, it should be one of our main activity to develop local currencies for local productions of things which are really important, in particular food. But it's also free access to services which are really fundamental and goods which are very fundamental. So a certain number of square meter. As I said, now you have a lot of empty places all around the cities and people who are condemned to live large families in very small flats. So maybe there is something to do there. It's also connected to a type of smart confinement to make all the young people stay at home with the elderly people. It's totally absurd and dangerous. So maybe to separate people who are facing more risk toward the disease, people who are facing less risk toward the disease, and step by step, you can start to have much more solidarity between both. The other point is about energy, water, and maybe about food and so on. But one of the symbolic measures I would impose and I would suggest on EU level right now, it's to provide for free all the funeral fees for the families losing people in this particular framework. When I see in France there was a scandal and companies are using this particular time on confinement, you cannot really move and so on, to charge the families of dead people even more. And that should be one of the first measures toward unconditional autonomy allowance and basic income, which would be step by step demonetized, give for free the funeral fees for everybody.
Thank you. And just to add to that, I believe the idea is also like going back to the invocation of the commons as a kind of alternative, kind of nested, webbed, polycentric kind of way of governing, managing resources, making decisions about them, and also at the level of economic production itself and the different modalities we could be using to do that. So the kind of nationalization trend right now is interesting, like in the UK with the rail system and Spain with the medical system. These could be precedents, you know, nationalizations, but also the kind of, you know, the...
Well, if you look at the past, when we had the Spanish flu, for example, in France, and also after the Second World War in France. So in time of very tough crisis, what we face again. And again, coronavirus is nothing to see with the Spanish flu or Second World War. But after, it was full of creativity. Like in France, we invented the mutualist movement when we had a type of institution which were neither managed by the state nor by a private entity, but we invented other type of governance, which would be much more participatory and so on. And all the debates about the commons and about direct democracy is driving us to how to be more creative and how to experiment and invent new ways of governance, which can be a very large diversity of entity. And it's very, I think there is a lot of enthusiasm and enjoyment of life in developing such things.
I propose we move on to the two questions we received in the feed. So first one is from Primoz. He asks, what would be the contemporary or historical examples of successful degrowth, if we can say any? Well, he says, besides the impact of corona epidemic, but I guess we wouldn't peg that as a successful degrowth.
I think we have to write history. We are the turning point. I really believe that, and it's one of the main mistakes in analyzing political movement, because there was a type of rewriting of history. We have a type of narrative of history that there was a day before and the day after. We have a type of writing of history like there was a revolution and the day before was different than the day after the revolution and so on. But when you scrutinize in much more detail how history is evolving, it's much more complex and linear. Usually when you have a revolution, it's to act a cultural transformation and also transformation which are already happening in a society. And I think we are in this type of period that there won't be a day before when we were in capitalism and a day after when we were in degrowth. There will be all the time both. There were already before coronavirus a lot of degrowth in our society. In this time of coronavirus, we can see that there are a lot of degrowth. I think about how people are voluntarily helping each other, which is in the heart of the degrowth political agenda, where we were taught, we were conditioned based on this intellectual imposture of neoliberalism that human beings are only driven by greed. This particular period is showing us that it's much more complex. And in time of catastrophe, it's not greed which is rising up, even if you have some behavior which are driven by greed, but it's mostly solidarity, care, how to help each other. You can see the behavior of the people working in hospital, threatening their own personal health, working in tough conditions because of political decision, but still they're doing the job. They are waking up every morning, they're doing the job. With the lack of material, the lack of mask, what they had, we could see that all around Europe, there were solidarity movement of people trying to collect masks and bring it to these people in hospital and so on. So I would say that degrowth was already here before. I spoke about several surveys showing like in France, 54% of the people are in favor of degrowth rather than green growth. So degrowth was already here before. It will maybe be more there after coronavirus, but it won't be like after coronavirus, we will have one morning we wake up and we are in a degrowth society. It will be a long-term transition with a lot of contradiction, with a lot of fights, maybe with a time when we will come back. What I expressed before about this totalitarian temptation by most of the European government is something very frightening. And on the contrary, you see a lot of self-organization around the local farming, people who self-organize themselves to provide food, to support local farmers, and so on. So we are in this situation. We were yesterday, we will be always in this tension between two worlds with each other. And the main question is how we can push more toward degrowth and less toward capitalism or ultraliberalism and greed and individualism and competition and so on.
Thanks so much. Maybe just a very quick follow-up. Like, I know you talk to a lot of people from different, spheres of life, from, activists to politicians to business people on degrowth. So maybe like a sensible question in the context of where I think pretty much was heading is also maybe examples that you refer to with different kinds of people to kind of paint the picture of degrowth.
I couldn't hear the last part of your question. Could you repeat, please? Sorry.
What kind of examples do you use with different kinds of people when you try to paint a picture of degrowth?
It's always a bit tricky. So I often like to make type of storytelling in what we have the opportunity to do with our friends here in Budapest in very, very small scale, but it's very interesting. So with Cargonomia, we connected together local, organic, sustainable food production and how to implement low-tech, sustainable, active logistics system for this food. Around that, we have a lot of educational projects, research projects, and we deal with a lot of other type of things like repair cafe, like workshop, like ecofeminism, like care and whatsoever. So we have a lot of projects going on in a very interesting small scale ecosystem, which is embedded into alternative life in Budapest, which was under threat in the last 2 or 3 years because of the rise of mass tourism and the rise of the price of real estate. But still it's here. And what is very interesting, so I used a lot the narrative about how do we live differently. It's also something we invite the students visiting us for a long term to write report and to communicate on our social networks or in their reports how life can be different when you make a step aside, when you start to be more autonomous, when you start to re-embed the economy within a solidarity economy, within a network of people with most of the know-hows which are necessary to have a good life, to fulfill all your basic needs. And what we are experiencing nowadays in time of coronavirus, that what we've been doing with all our partners, and thanks to them, and admire all the work which is made nowadays by the bike messenger, by the one repairing the bikes, by the farmers, and so on, because there are people who are doing the job which is necessary to still feed the people, and they are the one also taking a lot of risk to get exposed to the disease. So I really would like to thank them and to congratulate them for something great what they do. But in this particular time of coronavirus, we see how this system, which are smaller scale, embedded into territories based on trust, based on sharing the knowledge, based on solidarity economy, based on reciprocity, how much more resilient it is compared to the neoliberal system. So here we have a narrative that you have, and I speak about Cargonomia, but there are millions of examples like us all around the world. We can see that with this type of small, local is beautiful system based on human interaction, you can construct something where you enjoy life, where you get food which is very tasty, where you don't have to do stupid tasks every day the same in sitting in front of a computer or being in a factory and whatsoever. You can share the hard task, you can enjoy different type of know-hows, knowledge, and so on. So you can enjoy it. And moreover, it's something which is really economically and humanly and technically, energetically and whatsoever resilient. So it's something which is necessary toward the crisis we face right now and toward the upcoming crisis. And last and not least, I spoke about the violence of this imposed blind confinement, and it is necessary because we didn't take the right decision and the right time before and so on. But me, I have the chance to help and to work on these projects, and I have the chance to still have a life in respecting a very strict measure with a mask, keeping the distance, strong hygienic measure and so on, not to be contaminated and not to contaminate anybody, but in doing something which is super important in this time of crisis, to provide food, more healthy food, also to reinforce biodiversity, to reinforce the resilience and in particular to our food production in a territory and so on. I also have the opportunity to keep some conviviality in my life, to keep some link, to keep some solidarity, which is also super important to go through this crisis. And again, in respecting as much as possible the health strict rules not to contaminate anybody and not to be contaminated.
Thank you. I propose we move to the last question, and maybe I'll give Gal then a chance to maybe say some closing thoughts, and then I'll give a short closing. But our second question is from Dora, and she asks, dominant discourse still largely focuses on solving climate change and environmental issues with technological solutions.
Yeah.
As degrowth advocates for a fundamental transformation of our lives, what is your opinion? Is degrowth kind of the end of technological progress, or can both coexist in order to tackle climate change adequately? I suppose here's also the implicit question of ownership, etc. But maybe I'll give it to you, Vincent.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same question than with economy. If you think about economy, it's oikonomos, and so how to manage a house in a smart, democratic, caring way, and so on. And it became a neoliberalism. And technology is the same. I mean, the know-hows are fantastic, and we should reappropriate them. But we invented a type of technological society where, to quote Ivan Illich, we overpass the threshold of counterproductivity. We develop type of technologies which are not resilient, which are not autonomous, which are incredibly powerful, but very fragile. And we have to get rid of this high-tech approach and to reappropriate more like a low-tech approach. So to think type of technologies, type of knowledge, type of know-hows, which would be much more small-scale, local, embedded into territories and so on. And I would say there are a lot of research, a lot of innovation, to use a jargon which is very trendy among the system. A lot of innovation, a lot of enjoyment of life in developing all these low-tech technologies, what we need, like around bike, how to make a cargo bike which could fulfill this type of services, like around energy, how to implement type of low-tech insulation of the building, type of low-tech solar thermal panels, type of panels where you directly heat water without doing high-tech green electricity with large-scale wind turbines, which require big infrastructure and so on. So we have to find the right balance between all these type of things. And in what I'm doing nowadays quite a lot, there is a lot of urban gardening, where we have two projects in Budapest. One is about permaculture in a garden which is chaired by with a collective, and another one it's a cooperation between the University of Agronomy of Hungary and Zugló and Cargonomia. Zugló is a district of Budapest, so a local municipality, where we experiment urban agroforestry and how to rethink edible cities around the forest ecosystem, which will be sustainable, bring back biodiversity within the city and so on. And there again, it's type of a lot of technological or technique knowledge to know about the nature, to know about the plants, to know about the soil, how to implement it in a smart way, to have something where, again, we are not in war against the nature, we are part of the nature, but a type of innovation which is going to assume that we are part of the nature and how to live with the nature, which would be the same question toward the coronavirus, how to accommodate to coronavirus and not to fight against it. So there, I think degrowth is not against science and technology, but is more in favor of reappropriation of meaningful science and technology. And it brings a radical critiques to the myth of superpower. And it's going to be maybe my conclusion. It's also a radical critiques to our sick relationship toward this pulsion of domination, of dominating the nature, which is what you find with transhumanism, where we always put ourselves outside of nature, outside of life. I mean, life is meaningful because we will die sooner or later. I think coronavirus is also alerting us toward a sick relationship toward death, where maybe we should have managed differently this crisis, and we should manage differently the way we are dealing with our dead people nowadays in the framework of coronavirus, and the type of confinement where we face, and it's going to be a provocation as a conclusion, we face this dilemma that to make life still going on, we stop living in being confined and not interacting with each other. And we don't know how to go out of this type of dilemma. So there is something to open, a debate to open. And it's also connected to Bernard Maris, who was a fantastic heterodox economist, a French one who unfortunately was shot in the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. But Bernard Maris was criticizing from a psychoanalytical point of view capitalism and growth, saying that growth and capitalism is an unconscious race after immortality in collecting always more and more and more and more, and hoping that when you face death, you will have collected enough to buy immortality. So there is a very deep debate to address in this type of confinement and even later about our relationship towards the limits, toward death, towards the disease, towards the nature. How do we belong to that? And that technology won't be able to go above the limits, the physical limits, what we have to face, and the fact that we belong to this planet.
Thank you very much. Maybe Gal for a quick response or any closing thoughts.
Yes, but maybe go back to or try to connect some threads that we opened here. My first thing is that maybe this crisis offers us sort of opportunity to reassess or reevaluate some claims or some assumptions that we have. Mainly, capitalism prides itself as very good at allocating capital, resources, and assessing risk. And I think this moment we are living now sort of shows some limitation of this these processes. So most important shortcoming is that a lot of our systems now are very bad at assessing high impact events that have low probability or we have no experiences with. So this pandemic is one example of this, but I think you can see, you can think of, let's say, weather disasters or extreme weather events as similar type of high risk, high impact, low probability events that are, I think, not assessed properly in this system that we have now. And that market tools are not the most efficient ways, tools to tackle these issues. And on the other hand, we have the state or the democratic state. I mean, we are talking about this state because state is organization that is largely or at least nominally still democratically controlled as opposed to private enterprises. And what we see now is that the state has enormous powers if it chooses to use it. And we can think about other uses, that other issues that can be tackled with this process. So democratic process that is addressing not issues in this principle that are individual interests will come to common good. Instead, we have some issues that are common, that are not individual. And last point I think we should make is that we should be very careful or we should be skeptical or be questioning the moral framing of economic issues. And I think that degrowthers sort of have a lot of practice in doing that, or they are used to thinking deeply about moral implications of economic questions, whereas most often we see that moral framing is, for example, of creditor versus so between those who give money and those who take debt, for example, and that we should be skeptical, or we should think beyond those simple moral framings about what are actual relations in the society and what part of those relations are economic and what part are different.
Thank you so much, Garan, for those thoughts. I think, yeah, we've generated a lot of food for thought. I'm hoping that people can also refer back to if they couldn't join the live stream. Maybe just as a short closing, as part of that, I would also like to thank a person that's also here on the Zoom but invisible at the moment, Matej Ferenc from ULCA and Zavod Bob, who is helping us with the technical setup today. And Zavod Bob also does very great things in terms of online. Well, these days they're doing also online education and webinars for youth, but they have really great programs for youth. Well, that just about wraps it up, I think, for this session. We're about 20 minutes over, but I think that that's not too much of a problem. I would like to refer people who might be listening in that right now there's an online protest happening. You can refer to the Mladi za podnebno pravičnost webpage, Facebook page, Instagram, where we're kind of collecting people's thoughts, also photos with different slogans as a kind of one of the ways we can express our thoughts and civil disobedience in these times and given the measures. And also our colleagues at Pritličje have initiated a initiative, I believe, happening today at 7 of well, rattling on our windows. Also what we've seen happening in other countries as another strategy of dissent. So yeah, with that, I think we'll close this session for now. I'm also happy to invite everyone to join us next week. Well, we will be talking with Saskia Sassen and co-host Clemen Plosteiner, also on ecology, urbanism, redesigning urban futures through open source urbanism, and also concretely about the housing issues in Slovenia and how we can make some sense making around those kind of thoughts that are lying around. So thank you so much again, both for joining today, and I'm sure we will meet again some other time. And
thanks a lot, Rock and Gal, and also stay tuned because we will have the Vienna Degrowth conference online in the end of May, and on the 6th of June, the Global Degrowth Day, and we will propose different type of discussion like that one. So debate is going on. Excellent. Take care. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Same. Thanks.